Just bear with. There's recording. Transcript on. So we should see people start to join. Here we go. Right, it's great to see people joining. Please say hello in the chat. Let us know who you are and where you're from. Chat room's usually noisy for these types of events, and I'm expecting it to be especially so today because of our topic and our guests. You can follow us on Twitter as ever using the hashtag Waddscon. We'll just wait a couple of minutes before we start and before we get going. Okay, I'm going to go. So thanks for joining today's edition of Waddscon. Throughout 2022, we've been exploring how public relations practitioners work with the media and journalists. Today's session's about newsjacking. Over the series, we're exploring pitching, data storytelling, the relationship between owned and earned media, promoting coverage, measurement, and much more. Thanks to everyone that bought a ticket today. Really appreciate that. We've raised another 500 quid or so for our local food bank in Newcastle. That's much appreciated. Each of the speakers today is going to talk about a different aspect of newsjacking and responsive marketing. We're joined by Andy Barr from 10 Yetis, Paul Maher from Positive Marketing, Clara Kelly from Legacy, and Kate Hartley from Polpeo. They're each going to speak as ever for 5 minutes or so, followed by a Q&A. If you've got questions for them along the way, please do drop them into the chat. And the hashtag as ever, if you're following us on Twitter, is hashtag Waddscon. So first of all, we're going to head to Gloucester and speak to a friend of mine, Andy Barr from 10 Yetis, the agency he founded in 2005. Andy always has strong views, but he's got strong views particularly on newsjacking and the fact that it should be the domain of public relations. It pushes back on the encroachment of SEO in this space. Andy, you're very welcome. Thanks for joining us. You've got some slides to show us, I think.
I have. Thank you very much for the invite.
The stage is yours, sir.
Thank you. I will do the painful, can you see my screen? Right, so hi, my name's Andy. I'm from 10 Yetis Digital. We have to say that, don't we? So I was really happy when Steve asked me to come and talk about newsjacking, mainly because I'm a really bitter old guy, and I'm absolutely fed up with the digital PR and SEO communities claiming that they invented it. The other thing that I think is that newsjacking is actually the easiest bit of PR. As long as you're vaguely interesting, which rules me out, and are fairly quick, again, rules me out, you should absolutely be able to do it. So I decided to dig into reactive and newsjacking PR and find out exactly what happened. I actually went to the British newspaper archives because I'm that bitter and fickle, and I will go to such lengths to try and prove people wrong. I found that that actually the first example of newsjacking in the UK was in 1909, and it was by the AA, which is, I think, 74 years before the internet was even invented. And shock horror, I think it was actually 98 years before me and a few other people in our industry actually invented digital PR. There's a controversial thing, prove me wrong. So yeah, pre-1909, the thing that I found was it was really weird way of writing stories. Journalists just wrote, I can't remember what they're called, you know, facts. How odd is that? So there was no newsjacking, there was no instances of people, you know, trying to piggyback on stories. The media just wrote facts. But fast forward to now, as we can see with, you know, with the likes of the amazing Jam Press and Reach PLC and this new move to hyperlocal, newsjacking's at an all-time high. And when you think that any old fake celebrity Love Island influencer can put a tweet out there and the media can write a whole 700-word story around that tweet, you can kind of see why newsjacking and reactive PR is at the absolute heights that it is now, and it will only get stronger. But the TLDR, because we all love it, Newsjacking isn't new. It was invented in 1909. It's the easiest bit of PR, and yeah, the SEO and digital people didn't actually invent it. Blows my mind. Mic drop, walks out the room. Thank you very much.
Andy, thanks for that. Lively as expected. If you've got questions for Andy, drop them into the chat, and I'll pop them to him. Andy, what was the AA Newsjack in 1908? You're on mute, Andy.
Do not say that. I knew I was on mute. I was clearly trying to unmute it, you plum. So the first newsjacking was about a roads bill, a proposal that was put together for roads, and the AA went about it. There are some fantastic things in the news archives, as you'd expect. I think my favourite was an advert for what would now be considered to be a bath bomb that's claimed, this was in the early 1900s, that you put it in your bath and it dissolved your fat away. I really want to go back in time and buy that. But yeah, there was some cracker stuff in the, you know, in the archives. But that was the first example. Kind of before that, it was just people like bosses doing letters to the editor. And sort of fast forward to the sort of 60s and 70s, newsjacking went to the next level, largely pumped out by the growth of regional press.
What's your favourite newsjack that you've done as an agency at 10 Yetis?
Oh my God, the worst one, and I talked to people about this. Someone asked me from Metro if I would comment on why Two Girls One Cup has still stayed so well liked and well viewed to today's day and age. So when my kids grow up and Google my name, hopefully that'll pop up. That's probably my that probably suits my career today, doesn't it?
What do you use to monitor the news and come up with stories to align your clients with the news? Have you got any particular tools?
So I missed the start of that question, but I'm guessing it's what tools do you use? So I personally like things like lse.co.uk, which gives you the, you know, future trading results of the big FTSE companies. Obviously we use Twitter. You know, you won't get much better than using Twitter as a tool. You know, there's loads of platforms out there. I think if you're in the industry, you know, things like Talkwalker and Meltwater are absolutely fantastic for you know, seeing breaking stories, but you will never beat the things like BBC, Sky News and Twitter. So
you guys are, your agency are locked into the news 24/7, right?
Yeah, we are. You know, we've tried things like, I think it's PA's Media Point, which allows you to sort of plug into features and stories that are happening. But to be honest, you know, it's a fantastic tool. Love PA, but you know, the breaking news on telly is still, again, to the chagrin of digital PR people. Why'd you
get so pissed off about SEO encroaching on this space?
I'm not sure if I get pissed off about it. I get pissed off about the claims that they make. You know, just, you know, things like digital PR claiming that they invented newsjacking is one example. You know, I always talk about SEO in terms of, you know, PR is about making relationships and you know, getting stories from it, whereas the SEO approach to PR is just, you know, throw shit as far and wide as possible and hope it sticks, which then the rest of the PR industry gets tarred with. So yeah, so it's painful. Although saying that, we've just got a bollocking from the Sunday Times for repeatedly sending a press release to a journalist by accident. So maybe I should practice what I bloody preach.
Why 2 Yetis and not 10 Yetis behind you? In fact, tell us the story of your name. We asked that. You came on board.
It's really boring. When I worked in house, my nickname was Yeti, because apparently PR people you should hear but not see. And from an SEO point of view, because we were pioneers in online PR, you know, we launched at the point where it was really taking off, but we didn't call it digital PR. We called it, what do you call it again? Oh yeah, PR. So we launched at the sort of peak of the online PR, I guess, industry, and we put a number at the head of our name because it ranks higher on social media, or it did do back in the day.
You haven't thought about rebranding?
We have rebranded from 10 Yetis to 10 Yetis Digital. Nonsense, isn't it?
Kate's going to talk later on about the sort of go and no-go areas for newsjacking. Are the places you won't go? You talked about Love Island.
All the time, but I mean, no, I think it can work in pretty much every sector within reason. You know, we worked with the largest funeral company in the UK, and we did newsjacking and reactives for them as well. Obviously, you know, if you were, say, I don't know, if you were, say, Eurostar during the middle of that crisis 20 years ago, whenever it was, I'm very old, you probably wouldn't want to put out positive newsjacking examples around the deals that you've got going on. So when you're in the middle of a crisis, I definitely wouldn't use it unless it's as part of a rebuttal process to address false claims by the press. But you know, by and large, I think you can use it. You know, I've used it on some pretty, you know, dark campaigns through to some really fun ones as well.
How do you get clients to sign up to doing some of the edgier stuff that we know, you know, and creative stuff that we know 10 Years does?
Well, I think, yeah, it's always a thing. I remember going to a BuzzFeed talk where the editor said every client wants to be risky until you show them a picture of a vagina. So I think it's one of those things where you have to show them what the benefits are of being edgy, you know, the kind of things you've done in the past that have been risky, but have delivered great results, whether that's traffic, obviously sales is the number one, getting newsletter sign-ups, just getting more eyes on the prize. You need to understand what the goal is and then kind of work back from there.
Speed is obviously of the most important. How do you get stuff signed off quick?
Well, we say to clients, you know, from the start, again, you know, there's this growing thing going on at the minute where digital land is saying, oh yeah, we're offering just a newsjacking service, and everyone's like, oh my god, that's amazing, you guys are visionaries. No, it's not. It's what we used to call press office. So you know, it's a basic press office function. Again, showing my age, and we say to clients, look, if you want to get involved in this newsjacking and all that, you've just got to be quick and you've got to be vaguely interesting, and clients get that. So we use the same platforms as everyone else. WhatsApp's probably the most effective in terms of getting hold of clients at strange times of the day and night. We send the comment to them, we suggest it, they approve it or say, oh my god, please don't send that, and, you know, and it goes out. But it's about speed, and it's about being interesting, and it's about being plugged into what's actually going on.
What channels do you use to pitch stories into journalists?
Email, phone, dare I admit it. I mean, I see a growing number of people desperately reaching out on Twitter. I don't think that I've done that, but probably have. You know, but I just go old school, you know, telephone and email.
Right. Steve says, question here from Steve Earle, is there a point at which journalists get pissed off with newsjacking and the volume of it, rather than having your own actual news? Yeah,
I think so. I think I've got loads of examples. We work with a telephone brand that the Times, you know, when they used the reactive, they actually said, you know, insert brand who seems to have an opinion on everything at the minute, and then put the quote in anyway. So yeah, I think you can overuse it, but I do think that if you use it as part of a, you know, we used to call it marketing mix, but if you use it as part of a PR mix now, in terms of your, you know, you've got your proactive stories going out, you've got data stories going out, you've got those painful content marketing widgets going out that we're probably to blame for. You know, if you use it as part of that mix, it's not bad at all. It's just about, you know, finding the balance. Same with every other PR campaign.
Is it getting more difficult to do with digital PRs, SEOs encroaching on this space?
Not newsjacking. I still think, you know, we're one of the agencies that lead the way there, because people know that we're going to give them quirky, fun, interesting comments, and we're going to give it them quick. I think the digital PR landscape is very difficult at the minute, and I think, you know, that's evidenced by the number of journalists that moan about people asking if they can get a follow link from a story that's been written, you know, and I'm just as guilty of that. But yeah, so I think the digital sort of content marketing sector is very difficult at the minute, and I think that's why loads of people are trying to move away from it, and digital PR land is trying to grow this whole, oh, we invented newsjacking, to try and move into that, because it's, you know, essentially it's, you know, it's easy money, isn't it? But should we say that out loud? I don't know. It is.
No, it's challenging and very strategic. Andy, thank you for your your time and your session. Shannon, your MD's busy in the chat telling everybody about actually the Himalayan story and origins that behind the 10 Yetis name. So she's
It's
obviously
a sensible one. Thank you.
doing some rework there. All right, thank you very much. Cheers, Andy. Right, next up, we've actually lost Paul Maher. Paul's dropped off, so I'm going to go next to Clara Kelly. Clara, do you want to come on screen and say hello? Hello.
Hi.
Hello. Sorry, do you mind jumping in and we'll figure out where Paul is. Clara is. Do you want to open your deck and just share it on screen? There we go. Brilliant. Brilliant. Thanks, Clara. So, Clara, thanks for stepping in. Clara's former journalist working at for Joe and Reach, where her role was to break news on the internet. She now helps brands do the same, and she joins us from Dublin-based Legacy to talk about some examples of best practice. Clara, welcome and thank you.
Hi, thank you. Yeah, so I'm going to go through a journalist-led approach to newsjacking, and apologies in advance for how fast I'm probably going to be going through this, but yeah, so as Stephen just said there, I used to work for Joe as a breaking news reporter, and then for the Mirror in Ireland and the UK, and a few of the Reach regionals, just kind of doing breaking news. And for the last year, I've been a digital PR executive at Legacy. So I'm going to start by going through some of the do's and don'ts of pitching reactive news to journalists. We were just talking about that there, and even I think sometimes when pitching a story, if you pitch it the wrong way, even if it is reactive, it can tend to put the journalist off covering that release or even future releases. So the first thing that I tend to use is Muckrack. They usually have pitching preferences listed per individual journalist, and then also searching how each publication have written up previous releases. So for example, when I was working in Joe, they only allow you to use a sentence or two from a press release for key information, and then you're expected to completely rewrite the release before it goes up on site. And then for the Mirror, it's a lot softer. You can kind of do copy and paste when it comes to press releases, and that'll kind of change per publication. And then also a good tool is to check the publication's guidelines on PR. So for some publications, if you offer a gift or if you send a certain amount of press releases, they will actually put you on a blacklist. So I never send a press release out more than twice to any journalist or publication. The first time and then the second time with the angle kind of change, and then after that I'll leave them be. But it's good to kind of have a look through the publication's guidelines so you know how many times you can and can't send something. So the do's and don'ts: do be timely, do your research, have the best headline, know the news hook and double check. And then don't wait too long, plug without an article, without an angle, and then pitch to the wrong place or person or make them do more work. And then I've gone again to rush things so much that things slip through the cracks, because I think what's really important when it comes to reactive, you want to be the first to get a story out. But if anything kind of slips through the cracks, it will fall on the journalist, and then they're much less likely to use any releases you send in the future. So you kind of want to establish yourself as a source rather than establish a friendship with the individual journalist. So some common reactive mistakes and how to avoid them: not doing enough research. A pitch sent to the wrong organization isn't going to land, so it's important to know the tone of voice because it's going to differ per publication. Thinking in PR, you got to have to know what is the news hook, what is the value, is this too brand orientated, and does it fit with the content of their site? And then yet again, relying too much on connections. So journalists don't really prioritize relationships in the way that PRs do, especially when it comes to reactive news stories. They're going to prioritize news value. So making sure that your story can stand on its own and becoming that reliable source. What you ideally want to do with your reactive is compile it with data or have something extra to add or be the best comment in the first comment, so that instead of building a friendship with that publication or with that journalist, you're becoming a source that they're going to authentically reach out to every time they have to cover that topic, and then you don't have to do any work, which is the goal. The news cycle moves fast, so being the last to hop on a trending topic can halt it, even if it's the best story. So think ahead, plan your content based on knowledge of the news cycle. If the budget's coming up, have budget content. If you know the weather is going to change, have weather content, because that's what journalists are going to be doing every week at the end of the week. And then also think 30-33. So in journalism, we would often have 30 seconds if a topic just breaks. So say a death or something major, you have 30 seconds to get that up on site and you can edit it from there. You have 30 minutes per article. So every 30 minutes, the Facebook page or whatever page has to be updated with a new article. And then 3 is standard, the cap of the amount of times you can cover a topic per day, except for exceptional circumstances. So if you have the best weather story, but it's weather story number 4, it can't be covered, but number 3 can. Leaving out key information, journalists, yet again, they have such limited time, like 30 minutes per article if it's not breaking. So if they have to circle back for a phone number, a figure, or to check a spelling, then they're less likely to use the release in general. And then avoiding overselling phrases. They can sometimes be a turn off for sites like Joe. So instead I just write it as an article and let it speak for itself rather than saying, we think you'd be really interested in this. Usually what I would do is if it can't stand as an article on its own, then you should probably go back and rejig it entirely, which is always stressful, but something that I've had to do a lot. So what is good PR? It gets in ahead of the competition. It's organized and news driven, offers value to the journalist. So think of the news hook, doesn't make them work for information, pitch the correct publication, and is reactive and well researched. And then I think thinking like a journalist is key. So for example, the food crisis and the war in Ukraine, anything that's a sensitive topic has to be covered. And what I would encourage doing is thinking of the worst possible way the headline can be twisted. So if I have a gardening client that comes to me and says, I would like to encourage people to grow their own food because price hikes are coming up in the news a lot, I would immediately think, what way would I write that as a journalist? X company encourages people to just grow their own food amid food shortages. And instantly you can see that might be the sexier angle, but is it the angle that's going to get you a lot of backlash? Yeah, it probably is. Is there something else you can do, like offering free food or something that's going to be a little bit lighter? And then I've just went through a campaign that we did here that went back to that establishing authority. So we looked at the most stressful airports in Europe, which was a reactive piece that we actually compiled a bunch of data on each airport in Europe to add to it. So it led to 8, the number of Google rankings jumped by the company, 400% increase in referral traffic over 2 days, 114 pieces of coverage in national, regional, and broadcast publications worldwide. And then we had journalists reaching out organically for the information, 160 brand mentions and 40 links to the client website, which probably could have been higher, but there was no on-site asset. And the main thing that I stress about this campaign is it kind of established the client as a source. So not only have we seen the quotes be reused recently because airports came back into the news cycle, we had journalists reach out organically and ask for quotes because we established them as a source of authority the first time around by adding data and adding value to journalists who've been covering it. So that's it. I've added a link to the legacy website because I'm aware of how fast I was going through this. So the Heathrow case study and all the other case studies are there. And then that's my Twitter as well.
Brilliant. Thanks, Clara. Do you want to shut your deck down? I'm just have a chat. Thanks. That was great. If you've got questions for Clara, chuck them into the Q&A. I'm going to kick off. Interesting point. You talked about. No, actually, let's start at the beginning. So you former journalist. When you were a journalist at Joe or Reach, how many emails were you getting a day from PRs?
Thousands, if not like hundreds, because we usually have access to the editorial email as well. So you're not just getting individual pitches, you're getting the pitches sent to the entire editorial staff as well. So that's another one. If you're doubling up, send into the editorial staff and to an individual journalist, you're getting everybody's emails.
Right. Okay. So you as a journalist are getting thousands of email. How the hell does a PR cut through that noise? You talked about building relationships, but you've got to cut through to start building the relationship. Yeah,
I think it's about being as always on in terms of the news cycle as a journalist is. So we're talking about tools. I think Chartbeat is one of the best tools. We used it consistently. I used it in Joe. I used it in the Maher. You can build a custom kind of dashboard and you can add a bunch of different publications. So then you can see what each publication is writing about. And you can also see what's overperforming. So like if the Mirror has had every top story over the last 2 weeks has been an airport story, you'll see that that's consistently overperforming for them and what headline is overperforming. And then you can use that to kind of target the Mirror and target each publication. And in general, I'll tend to build a custom media list for each release. So I'll go to, say, for the airport release, we had our media tools, and then I will also Google the topic and then look at the headlines that are being used per journalist.
And what that tool, sorry, Amber's just asked, what was that? Chartbeat was that tool, did you say? Yeah, Chartbeat. Okay, great. Any guidance on headlines that get, Sam Brimer's asked, any guidance on headlines that are likely to get noticed?
It depends on the topic, and it depends on the publication as well. Like Joe, for example, tend to avoid the word revealed. The Mirror also, the last time I was there, and I can't confirm for now, but they had a course where they were like, certain words are blacklisted because they actually make you rank lower on Google, and like revealed was one of them. So for analytics reasons, that isn't allowed. But I think for the Sun, they love revealed. So I think it's more so, there's no specific good headline. What I would suggest doing is looking at the publication and the specific topic before sending the release, and then kind of is making your headline a custom headline per each publication if you have the time.
Okay, so mad headlines publication, that's really good. Actually, you're getting tons of comment here from lots of people. Really enjoyed this your session. You talked about pre-planning. So newsjacking, we think about being responsive, but you talked about pre-planning. Was the Heathrow story you just gave the example of pre-plan?
Yeah, the Heathrow was a combination. When I started to see that airports were picking up, I started on the Heathrow data and got a team on that, and then we actually decided to hold on it until Easter, because that's when I anticipated it was going to be the most, like the journalists, one, I think there's going to be less journalists on, so you're going to get more coverage, and two, we anticipated that because of Easter travel, it was going to pick up and have a spike then. So I think it's a combination of both things, like knowing the news agenda, but then also knowing when to hold and when is going to get you the most kind of coverage.
What do you use for your data source for the Heathrow story?
We have freelancers, so we outsource to kind of people who gather the data for us.
Good. All right. Sorry, you might be able to answer this. You may not. If you can't, please say. But Andrew Smith asks about Reach has huge targets for journalists in terms of page views. Is that an opportunity for PRs in helping journalists find stories that are likely to rank high?
Sorry, you just cut out there. I missed that.
Right, sorry. Andrew asked, Reach, we know from Press Gazette and other sources that Reach, journalists at Reach have high targets for page views. Is that something that PRs can help with? Can you pitch a story based on its likelihood to generate traffic?
I think you can and you can't. Like, you can pitch a story based on, like, if you're writing a story for Reach, you might know that the top 10 sunniest destinations in whatever kind of region is going to get page views because you've written so many of them. But you can't 100% predict anything like that either. So I feel like if you try to play too much into that, it can come back to overselling, and they might be more likely to avoid it because they might want to kind of have their own angle on things as well.
Right, okay. It's good. Thank you. You're getting a lot of people really enjoyed your presentation, so thanks a lot. Let's conclude. You came up with this rule that I haven't heard before, the 30-33 rule. Just talk us through that again, because that seemed to be incredibly insightful, but also useful. So 30 seconds to break your story, 30 minutes to reload a story, and I missed the 3.
This is just for any place that I've worked so far. I've found that usually we've been 30 seconds, say like somebody major dies, or you get a big press release, a company is foreclosed, you get roughly 30 seconds to get that out, and then you're encouraged to edit once it's up on site. But you will be getting like frantic phone calls from the editorial team being like, why isn't that up yet if it's not up in 30 seconds? Every 30 minutes, roughly, that can change. It can be between 20 to 45, and it can be updated based on a break-in story. But roughly the rule is a story should be ready every 30 minutes on a shift. And then 3 is kind of the cap that we had in both places, where it would be, we don't want to overcover anything. So except for exceptional circumstances, it would be kind of capped at 3 per story per day.
Brilliant. Okay, I'm going to squeeze one last question in from Jonathan Moyes about the use of text versus other forms of content when you're pitching a journalist. Do you just pitch text, or do you use images? Or
I would always give them an image, and then if they use it, they use it. If they don't, they don't. Like we just did a reactive last week, and we found that we got a lot of branded image uses. So I'd encourage, even if you can get a bit of branding into the image, you might get people who put it within the story, and then it's just an extra bit of coverage as well if they don't use your quotes or use something else.
Okay. Clara, thanks so much for a really insightful session. The comments, you must check through the comments in the chat because there's some lovely feedback. Really appreciate your time. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks. So next we've got Paul Maher. Hello, Paul. Welcome back.
Hey, yeah, thank you. And ironically, the tech fallout that I just had, we would trend jack that. We absolutely would and have.
So don't worry, we're used to gremlins on the Waddscon series. So you're the founder of Positive Marketing based in Richmond. You're going to talk about newsjacking in the B2B sector and actually how you can generate surprising results, right?
Yeah, right. So yes, thanks so much for the opportunity. And I just have to say that Steve and Clara are amazing presentation. We're going to try and not cover the ground we've done. We are B2B tech, which does somewhat limit what we can do. We can't have all of the fun that you guys in B2C land can have, but we have got a few tricks of the trade that I'm going to hopefully share over the next couple of minutes with you. So just thinking about our world is somewhat more serious, as some would say, than the world of consumers, and that means we have to be pretty respectful of a bunch of rules. Typically, we're a B2B tech agency, so our clients are American, and land with the free and all that. But the truth of the matter is, they are pretty buttoned up, pretty conservative when it comes to trend jacking, and we're in a constant sort of dialogue with these guys to try and get them to loosen up a little bit. I'll give you some examples as we go through. So one of the things that everyone here is coached. I'm a former journalist, as are other people on this call, and so very, very sensitized to what makes a story and what doesn't. And in terms of ranking, I've ranked sort of 5 typical type trend jack things that we would get from our clients here, and they'd say, go trend jack that. So starting at 0 basically is the glorified launch, and some of us will still suffer from we just created a brand new carbon dingulator and we'd like lots of press, so go at it. Clearly not a trend jack, but clients do expect results, and so part of the job here is to try and add the glorified launch to a trend jack, because one can make 3. Down in the lower reaches of creativity, if you will, is calendar marketing. We've all done this. So, classic is Valentine's Day, Black Friday, completely played out now. It's pretty uncreative, but it will suffice in the absence of nothing else. Obviously, we've got summer holidays coming up, lots of stories about people getting stranded on planes, etc., etc. That does work. But much more impactful as we get up, and being British and being very honest about this. The press loves a negative story, right? And this is part of the tension that we get when we trend jack things, is we want to give the press what they want, which is somebody's getting a kicking, but at the same time, we've got to try and keep it positive. So that is a lot of the skill in what we're doing, is just surfing that line between something that journalists are interested in and our clients saying, you're making me sound bad. And bear in mind what I said about Americans, they don't like bad news. So, that is a line that you've got to surf very carefully. Another way of flipping that round is when somebody else launches something, and let's remember big tech is launching stuff all the time. There's a new Apple product, there's a new Facebook goggles, there's new Google search functionality, etc. Amplifying someone else's launch is the same thing as raining on someone's parade, but you may want to be a little less negative. You may want to say, well, that's fabulous. Let me tell you what we think about that. And that leads us to like the 5-star opportunity. And the 5-star opportunity, if you can pull it off and you've got the timing right, as other people have mentioned, is that here's what we see. Now, to get to that, we'll talk a little bit about how you have to be persistent to get to that. To get that to that is a lot of work before you get there. But that, for us, is the 5-star, here's what we see type trend jack. With me. Having some fun and games with this. Right. This is pretty important. People mentioned timing. We think what makes a good trend jack, we're all British, so irreverence makes for a good trend jack. If you have got something that appeals to a British sense of humor, that's great. don't try this in Holland, don't try this in Israel, do try this in the UK, don't try it in Germany, don't try it in the US, but irreverence, we love something that is somewhat off color, as long as we're not veering into inappropriateness. It also needs to be massively, massively relevant. So stalk your targets. I think people talked about where they look. I think there was a little bit of chat about Twitter. Twitter's a great place to find out before you trendjack, and a lot of trendjacking is in the preparation. Find out what turns on journalists and doesn't turn journalists. We're working right now on a story about space, not something we cover a lot, but we are actively looking for people who are mentioning space that we can say, we know you're interested in space, have this story. I mean, it is a tech story, but we need to know that they're going to be receptive to it. In terms of the irreverence, yeah, you know, think about things like the Aldi move when they launched against Brewdog, and Brewdog launched an Aldi beer against Aldi. I mean, these are the sorts of things that appeal from a PR perspective to journalists. And then, you know, in terms of like timeliness, just moving to the diagram on the right-hand side, this is the way that we see the world in the B2B news cycle. So if we start at the bottom, and forgive the old schoolness of this, there's the BBC Radio 4 Today programme, and say what you want about BBC or Radio 4 and its demographic. That story goes into all the newsrooms for the news meetings, the 10 o'clock news meetings, where people are deciding on the national press what story will go in. And you can imagine the beleaguered tech journalist amongst all of the people with all the royal stories and the, you know, the war stories, and they're sticking their hand up saying, I've got a tech story. It needs to be solid. So we listen to the Today programme as a team, we suggest things, we have our own news meeting internally, and then we're pitching, and then it's lunchtime. We've got the lunchtime news, and Watto, which for those of you who don't listen to Radio 4, and God bless you, is the World at One. That colours what the national press picks up on the TV news and radio news around about the PM time. There is the BBC PM programme, but also all the TV evening newses, Sky, the ITV News and Channel 4. And that in turn feeds the press previews that round off the day. Now that news cycle is something that we pay a lot of attention to. And at certain points of the day, we'll huddle and say, that story idea we had in the morning, not working, bin it. Or that story that we thought was maybe a flyer and maybe we didn't know, it's really being picked up strong, it's going to go big, and then we start the whole process again. So we are, in other words, we are trendjacking multiple times a day in some instances. So finally, you know, when's it not work? That's a question you asked, I think, Steve. It's a fair one, right? You know, you need to be sensitive. There is a take on newsjacking and trendjacking that it's a little bit like ambulance chasing, and that is true. You know, the American clients we have will tell us that sooner than the British clients. They have more of a tolerance for it, but you need to not ambulance chase. We've got some horrible examples. You know, frankly, we've taken it too far ourselves on occasion. We'll talk about that if you want. But you need to just make sure that you're on the right side of the argument. And one of the big criticisms we get, as you can imagine, because all of our clients have got what they think is amazing tech, and they do have amazing tech. But when you take the trendjack or the newsjack too far away from what they do, they validly say, what the hell's that got to do with me? So you need to be sensitive to that. Timing is critical. Somebody else mentioned how fast they're going. I'm totally amazed with the speeds I just heard from Clara. But you know, in terms of timing, is it you or is it the client? The best thing to do is get the client ahead of it. So the sooner you can get that client approval to your question, Steve, the better. Even better if you can do it like a week or two in advance, which is very easy when it comes to calendar marketing, not so easy when it comes to some of the other things that we talk about. And then finally, you know, persistence. This is, trendjacking is one of the funnest things that anybody in this lovely creative industry of ours can do. It's amazing, but you need to know when to call it a day, and you also need to know when to persist. So we have lots of examples where we've been told by journalists, you know, leave it out, that's enough, stop. And you know, like all of us, they sort of work in the day and then switch off at night. And then a week later, you'll get that call that said, oh, can you just remind me what you were saying about this? Because we're going to write about it now. And the classic example we've got there is we badgered the Financial Times for absolutely months and almost years with a report that we were asked to PR. And then we had a little change of thought, put it into the data guys. it appeared in the FT story, nothing to do with our client, but with a tiny, tiny little mention of the client's name on the graph that the FT had gone to build on their own, off their own bat. We didn't even know about it. It appeared, and we saw it. And straight off the bat from that, talk about PR being valuable. I had an inbound email from an analyst at one of the large US banks, I think it was Morgan Stanley, to say, do you mind awfully if we use your data? And of course we don't. And that's an example where just being a little bit persistent, slightly different in our approach, resulted in real life sales opportunities. So that's my story. That's what I've come to tell you. And yeah,
thanks, Paul. Do you want to shut down your deck, and we'll if anyone's got questions for Paul, chuck them in the Q&A and chuck them in the chat, and I'll bounce them to him. In the meantime,
yeah, bear with me, guys.
Deck shut. That's all right.
Stop sharing. There we go.
There you go. Paul, you mentioned there you got a hit in the FT that resulted from a newsjack. When we were talking ahead of this call, you talked about actually some extraordinary results you've generated from newsjacking. I mean, the FT isn't unusual, right, in this context?
Yeah, I mean, and the FT, the Economist, I mean, if you speak to some of them journalists, I mean, the Economist in particular has told us straight, we don't need PRs. We can speak to anybody we want, but they will take a trend jack, and we've got a trend jack in that newspaper, they like to call themselves, on the back of the airline strikes a while back, and I think NATS was out, the air traffic controllers were out, and of course, like I said, like all of us, we have the best intentions, but we sometimes forget. Trendjacking and newsjacking is one of the most powerful tools that PRs have got, and it will attract them eventually because they're in the same job as us. I'll give you another quick example from this week, if I may. There's a television program. Forgive me, I don't even know what it's called, but it's coming out on Thursday, and it's vaguely related to IT. Brilliant. Our guys got on this, and to my shock, horror, and amazement, we got one article in a national newspaper with 3 clients mentioned, all quoted, all fresh quotes. Didn't see it coming. Just craziness, because we got to the right person at the right time with a story for something they were writing about an upcoming TV program. And whilst we can't have Love Island style fun, at least I haven't found out how to do it with B2B tech yet. We can get into the zeitgeist of the nation if we hit it right. So yeah, it can happen. It's harder in B2B, but it's there to go after. And as I say, you've got the right creative team, it'll happen.
Question from Steve Earle, we both know and love well. The younger generation of practitioners don't pick up the phone enough and over rely on email. Is that fair? Is that even appropriate with journos working from home?
I think, how can I do this diplomatically? He's right.
No, he's right.
He's right. But the reason I think that comes from is, 2 years of not working in the office, a lot of time spent, socializing, but not really socializing off devices. And so we do coach people a lot on the phone because let's face it, when you're starting off, you're getting a whole lot of no's, and there's some blooming rude media out there, which we could probably spend hours talking about, including the chap on The Economist who said, I don't waste my time with PRs. I mean, how insulting is that? Who feeds them his stories? But yes, they don't spend enough time. But you know what? Neither do the journalists, right? You try and get a journalist live on a national paper, and often they're not in the office. So somebody mentioned, I think Andy was talking before about how else we get to them. WhatsApp is an option. It's pretty in your face. So if you've got the mobiles, do that. Twitter's pretty good, If you follow the right people and give them reason to follow you back, a DM is good, and email still works, albeit everybody is aware that there's thousands of emails flooding in. So you're right, and it can be coached, but it ain't the only way.
I was really interested in your workflow. So you literally match your workflow to a newsroom environment.
We do, and we have a stand-up every morning. Each team has a stand-up, and we treat it like an editorial meeting. So it's like, all right, Steve, what have you got? Clara, what have you got? Kate, what have you got? Andy, what you got? And it's almost like we're bidding how we're going to spend our time, much as you would in a newsroom, where it's like, my story, my story. And it makes it sort of interesting and competitive internally.
That's good. Paul, I want to thank you for your time. Really insightful presentation. And you can see there's lots of comments in the chat. Thank you for joining us. It's very much appreciated. So next we're going to move to Kate Hartley. Kate from Crisis simulation platform and professional advisory firm Polpeo, based in London. Kate has some guide rails for us related to crisis on when a brand maybe should and maybe absolutely should not newsjack. Hello, Kate. How are you doing?
Hi. Thank you very much. Thanks for having me. They were really interesting pieces, and I'm going to pick up on some of the points that a couple of people have said about the potential backlash as well. So let me just share my screen. So, as Stephen said, I'm Kate Hartley. I'm the co-founder of Polpeo, which is a company that uses simulation technology to train teams on how to manage a crisis as it breaks online and on traditional media. But I'm really interested in the kind of backlash stuff and how people respond to organisations in a crisis and what brands do to trigger that backlash. So I'm going to change it up a little bit and talk about when you absolutely, definitely should not get involved in talking about a topical issue that's leading the news agenda. And when I was putting this session together, I kind of really struggled to narrow down some of the examples of brands who've done it really badly, because there are so many of them, which is kind of a shame. But I think if they'd asked themselves 3 key questions before they jumped in to comment or get involved in these issues, they could have saved themselves some real problems. So if you're thinking about newsjacking, a really big social type issue, then check whether you can answer these questions first. So the first one is your own house in order? This is probably the biggest one. And here are 3 examples from brands who didn't get it right. So the first one is one of many firms, the one on the left, one of many firms that posted messages of support for the Black Lives Matter movement after the murder of George Floyd. In this case, it's Unilever. It could have been anybody. But if you scratch the surface, you can see there's a bit of a problem in that Unilever was one of many firms that make skin lightening creams, particularly marketed at women in the Middle East, Asia and Africa. They're not the only ones. So Johnson & Johnson, L'Oreal, a lot of other ones do as well. They all those firms say these are not skin bleaching products, but of course the packaging shows before and after shots that appear to show skin appearing lighter. So there was a massive backlash against that. Unilever, as a result, said it was rebranding the product and removing all references to whitening, lightening and fair, and they took away the imaging on the packaging, but you can see the issue. The second example is M&S, which created an LGBT sandwich to jump on the back of Pride a couple of years ago. I'm assuming they couldn't find a filling starting with Q. Sadly, they had just launched their stores and cafes in Saudi Arabia, which has one of the worst human rights records in the world, particularly for LGBTQ plus people. Being gay is punishable by death there. So understandably, it didn't extend its big gay guacamole-filled sandwich to Riyadh. And there was a big backlash about that as well. And then there's Walmart. So Walmart does what lots of retailers do, or lots of brands do. They cover everything in rainbow flags for Pride Month. They tell everyone how supportive they are of their LGBTQ plus colleagues and communities. But they do go a bit further. They donate quite a lot of money to LGBTQ plus charities, which is obviously a really good thing. But sadly, they donate the equivalent amount of money to US politicians who actively oppose equal rights for LGBTQ plus people. So some examples here: Senator Loeffler campaigns to ban trans women from women's sports. McConnell's voted against pretty much every equality bill that's ever come in. Senator Daines opposed same-sex marriage. You get the picture. And then they weren't the only ones who were caught out like this either. Amazon and Disney have also been caught out. Disney talking most recently on the Don't Say Gay bill in Florida. So people want meaningful action from brands, not just words. And you only really have permission to comment on a big trending social issue if you've actively done something about it yourself. So the second question is, are you trivializing something really serious and exploiting it for your own profit? Snapchat landed in hot water for the most appalling ad promoting a game of Would You Rather by exploiting Rihanna's domestic abuse by Chris Brown. They did take the ad down pretty quickly, but it came to light that the ad was actively reviewed and approved by the Snap team before it went up. It wasn't a mistake. It was a really bad judgment call. Then there's the Pepsi ad. I don't know if you remember this a few years ago. This showed Kendall Jenner leaving a photo shoot to join a civil rights protest. And in the ad, she walks up to a police officer and hands him a can of Pepsi, and that miraculously just diffuses any tension that there was in the crowd. And Pepsi, quite rightly again, got hammered for this and were accused of being tone deaf and trivializing the debate about police brutality and Black Lives Matter. And then to kind of really finish it off, Bernice King, who's the daughter of Martin Luther King Jr., tweeted a photo of her father being confronted by a police officer at a civil rights march with a caption, "If only Daddy would have known about the power of Pepsi." And then the final example is the CEO of a salad company called Sweetgreen in the US, who posted to LinkedIn that COVID was mostly caused by obesity, and if we all ate salads, we'd be okay. That post got taken down pretty quickly too. Now, he said he was trying to open a debate on public health, but clearly that was exploiting, I think, a very serious issue for his own advancement. The third question is, do you have the expertise or credibility or lived experience to be able to comment? Are you adding anything to the debate? Now, this first example might be a bit controversial. I think Ben & Jerry's usually gets it right in the way that they comment on political or social issues. But personally, I think they got it really badly wrong at the beginning of the war in Ukraine rather. So this was a tweet that called on President Biden to de-escalate tensions and to work for peace. Now, I'm pretty sure he would have considered that option. I don't think he needed an ice cream company to tell him. And although Ben & Jerry's has a history of getting involved in political and social issues, so you could argue they have permission to comment in some cases. But in my view, an ice cream company, no matter how much of a social activist it is, doesn't have the credibility or the expertise to shape government war policy. And then how do you go back to tweeting about ice cream after that? There was a post shortly after it that jarred with me, which was talking about where to buy ice cream treats for your dog while people were starving in Mariupol. It just seemed, to me, it seemed wrong. And then there's a kind of vacuous thinking of you type post that literally add nothing to the debate. And this one on the right is Kylie Jenner, who got herself into hot water when she posted thoughts and prayers to Ukraine. This is, I mean, the most overused useless phrase, and then jumped straight back into promoting lipstick. So clearly there was no kind of permission there, if you like, to comment. She wasn't adding anything to the debate. So whether you have permission to comment on a topical or social issue comes down, I think, to two things. If you're going to comment, can you demonstrate that you have taken real action on the issue you're talking about? Or are you simply paying lip service in order to get coverage? You have to have earned the right to take that position. And then secondly, if that comment is in line with your values and has always been in line with your values, then you might have a permission. If it isn't, it's going to rankle and it will lead to a serious backlash. Thank you.
Right, I was on mute there. Thanks, Kate. Appreciate that. Really good. Lots to unpick there. Sarah Waddington, known and loved to the Waddscon audience, and tweeted last night that we live in a society at the moment where activism is no longer optional. Do you not think brands increasingly need to step into social issues? There's been lots of questions. There's a couple of comments here about Roe Wade and whether that's going to be. It's almost certainly already been newsjacked, hasn't it?
Yeah. Yeah.
Sorry, go on.
Sorry, no, sorry. Yeah, they definitely. It's not an option. I totally agree with that. They have to get involved. And one of the really interesting ones actually was before Roe v. Wade, was when Texas brought in its really repressive abortion laws before the Roe v. Wade was overturned towards the end of last year. And included in the law in Texas was that if you took somebody to an abortion clinic beyond the 9-week, I think it was, barrier, you could be sued for aiding somebody to have an abortion. So you could be prosecuted for that. Now that included cab drivers. So Lyft and Uber were in the really strange position of having to comment publicly on reproductive rights in Texas. Now, I don't imagine there would be any crisis planning session in the world if you'd been in marketing at Uber where you would have thought you would have had to get called in on that debate, but they had to, because they had to put a fund in place to say, if our drivers get caught up in this, we will help them fight their legal case. And the same with other companies. I think Match.com was one of the first in Texas to come out and say that they would support their employees with healthcare benefits, for example. And of course, now Roe v. Wade has been overturned, then organisations have to do that. Equally,
some of the period monitoring apps that gather data, Google, Meta, have remained silent. Should they not step up? Because potentially they could be involved similarly. Should they not step into the discussion?
Definitely should. And there's going to be a massive question of data privacy as a result of this as well. So they absolutely have to. And they've had time to prepare for this. They should have known what their stand is going to be. So I totally agree. They should absolutely get involved. My concern is when organisations get involved when they don't have the right to be. So like we saw with Black Lives Matter, when people didn't have representation within their own organisations, or with the skincare brands where they were actively doing something to promote colorism. There are some people, you should get your own house in order before you comment on somebody else's, I think.
So in studying public relations and looking at the role within an organization. I've heard it variously described as either a jester in the Shakespearean sense of being able to poke and ask questions of the C-suite, or an organizational conscience. How do you think practitioners step into this space when an organization is clearly making the wrong call? How are you the one that says, no, don't do that, that's ridiculous?
We get asked that a lot, actually, when we're doing crisis training. People saying, oh no, that's a bit above our, either above our pay grade or not quite in our remit. But if we are custodians of a business's reputation, then we have to give advice that is relevant to the reputation of the business. And if that means telling a company that they should change the business practice, or they should make a different decision, or that they should sack somebody who's done something awful, then we should be doing that. Legal do it, and we should be doing it too. But we're inevitably the people that will be asked to clean it up when it goes wrong. So if we can ask the business to take action to prevent the issue in the first place, then we should be doing that. I believe really strongly in that.
Yeah. Okay. So Paul Maher who was just on before you, asked a question about the range of risk associated with a smaller brand versus a larger brand. Do you see that smaller brands more risky and edgy, larger brands less so?
I mean, they can be.
Brewdog's wrestled with this right the way through its growth, hasn't it? It still thinks it's small.
Yeah, really has, and I think you quite often see that. We saw it with Virgin as well in the early days when it was trying to be seen as edgy, and now of course it's obviously not anything but really. Yeah, I mean, smaller brands in some ways can be less risk averse and therefore can be a bit more edgy and get away with it, but it depends if they tread on the wrong toes. I mean, look at that salad. I don't think that salad brand in the US is particularly huge. It became known for all the wrong reasons for trying to capitalize on something. Very often they won't have the structures that will stop them making the bad decisions in a smaller organization, so they need to think about these things more. I think there are probably more checks and balances mostly within the bigger organizations. On the other hand, the smaller organizations can take action quicker. So yeah, it's 6 of one, half dozen of the other, I think.
I've talked about the diversity in the room to make the call on if there being a diverse range of voices in a room, you can imagine some of these instances that you shared wouldn't have got through. That's important.
Oh my God. I mean, I always say, if you're not sure about something, go and ask somebody from one of the communities that you're supposedly supporting. And I think that 90%, there are two things that you can do. Read your statement out loud to somebody who is in the group that you're talking about and see how they react to it. And just go and actually take advice from either an organization in that sector or from your own employees, whatever you can do. 90% of stuff would not get through.
Yeah, I agree, absolutely agree. Is there a case of damned if you do, damned if you don't? Sam asked this, in that organizations are going to polarize. They're going to maybe appeal to some of their community and piss off others. And that's a place that brands have got to get comfortable with playing, right?
Definitely. And I was talking to a brand about this the other day who said it may get to they were getting involved in the transgender in sports debate, which they didn't want to be, but because they're a sports related brand, they kind of had, they got dragged in. And the CMO said it's getting to the point where we're just going to have to decide what kind of customers we want and what we don't want. There will always be organizations getting dragged into things they don't. We're going to see this in Roe v. Wade. Organizations who come up and say they will support travel outside of state, for example, for abortion-related healthcare, they're going to get hammered by the pro-lifers, but they would equally be hammered if they didn't say anything. The New York Times has a list at the moment of organizations that's giving its employees healthcare support after the Roe v. Wade discussion. So yeah, you're right, they're going to get hammered either way. So you just have to know what you believe in, stick to it, and just kind of deal with it, I guess.
It is interesting, this radical transparency that is emerging with lists like that. We had the same with organizations pulling out of Russia, didn't they? Where now people are building lists. What a great way to end today's session, Kate. Thank you so much for such a thoughtful and inspiring presentation. And so we're done. Thank you to everyone. We're taking a break now for the summer until September. Until then, I want to thank all our speakers, Andy, Paul, Clara and Kate, and I want to thank you all for joining. Thank you very much and have a great rest of the day.